Thank you for tuning in to Critical Action Leaders Getting Down to Business. This NC Chamber podcast is coming to you to bring together our business leaders to discuss the racial injustice that is spreading across our state and in our nation. And most importantly, we're coming together so that we can have meaningful dialogue, how the business community can really drive meaningful change that we so badly need. Well, thank you to all our listeners joining us today. My name is John Murphy, and I'm honored to be the host of this series of podcast interviews. And today's guests on the Critical Action Leaders Getting Down to Business are Charles Bowman, who's North Carolina Market President of Bank of America, and Daniel Freeman, who's founder and CEO of Genius Talent Group. Gentlemen, you're both very welcome indeed. You might just introduce yourselves and your companies briefly. Charles, if I can go to you first.
Sure. I'm Charles Bowman. I'm the market president here in Charlotte for Bank of America and in North Carolina. I've been with the company for about 24 years. Most people, I think, recognize the brand Bank of America, but we're a large financial institution, and we're global in almost all parts of the world with about 210,000 employees, and just really delighted to be here and be part of this.
Well, thank you for that. Well, I think certainly Bank of America is an extremely well-known and well-represented globally bank. Charles, David, Daniel, sorry, can you give us a little introduction to yourself and your background and your company?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for Charles as well for joining the call. My name's Daniel Freeman. I'm the founder and CEO of Genius Talent. We're a full-scale talent solutions and talent management firm that partner with organizations across the country to help them with their talent strategy and help them with hiring for areas where they strategically need help. So my background has been in the talent space. I've been in it for the last 15 years and was fortunate enough to found Genius Talent and have a great group of folks working with us, and happy to be here today and discuss this very important topic.
Oh, great. Well, Daniel, if I can start with you, I mean, we talk about, with everything that's gone on recently with the deaths of, black men and women at the hands of law enforcement, along with, lots of other events that have just been so upsetting to observe. For you, with your staff, with your people, and also with your clients, what are some of the conversations that you're having around these events?
Yeah, thanks for that question, John. I think that, it's interesting. There's almost a dichotomy of conversations. On one hand, when I think about some of my white colleagues and/or white clients that have seen what's going on in the country, there's almost a consoling type of conversation around the plight of Black people, and so what I've tried to do from that perspective in those conversations is change the narrative. From empathy to more towards action, towards equity. And, those conversations have been very fruitful. Conversations on the flip side with some of my Black peers or Black colleagues or employees have been, really about frustration. There's, despite years and years of, blood, sweat, and tears, if you will, given the attempt to bring about change, there's still not been the change that I think the community is looking for. And, really it takes a nation collectively, and each individual's response to get us to where we need to go. But, I think we're a long way off when I'm thinking about all the conversations that I'm having. But I think the conversations are much more deeper and authentic today.
And Charles, for you in Bank of America, I mean, obviously you've got, a huge number of staff. Some it impacts more on others, some respond differently to others. What are the sort of conversations that you're having with your people?
Well, the conversations at Bank of America have been pretty wide ranging, all the way from, I'll say, one-on-one conversations. I'll just use my team, for example. I think we've had more intimate conversations about each other in the last several months than we've had in years before. So in some ways, we've gotten to know each other a lot better. I think we've understand, particularly among my African-American colleagues, the deep hurt that I think they've experienced since the George Floyd murders and before. I think that's the the awakening that folks like me who are white have to own up to is that it's been there before. I don't think we've ever really fully embraced it or recognized it. So conversation has gone in a small team level, individual levels, all the way up in different functions or departments. I'm part of a group called I'll report to the Chief Administrative Officer, and we have weekly smaller group sessions with people who elect to come online. We call Break the Silence. That's among the functional group. Brian Moynihan, our CEO, has also had sort of internal podcast, if you will, or webinars with external leaders like Lonnie Bunch at the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. So they've taken place at all different levels, and each one takes a different tone, frankly. In some cases, there's a lot of emotion. People relating their experiences that are eye-opening. I mean, I guess one of the typical ones is the conversation that African American males have to have with their sons as they're beginning to drive cars about what to do and not to do if they're pulled over inevitably by law enforcement. So, and all the way to, some here in Charlotte, not far from where I live, an experience several years ago with, let's just say, a very inappropriate sign put in someone's yard that was very racially motivated. So the conversations they're not all over the place because they're fairly focused, but they're not corporate in nature. And what I mean by that is they're not programmed. The conversations we set up, and I've led some of them, is there's not a presentation. It's sort of an open mic, and people come and we channel the conversation based on where people want to go and what their experiences have been.
Yeah. And when you look at we'll come to stay with you just for a moment as Bank of America. I mean, how do you see how your institution, Bank of America, is kind of uniquely positioned to help, address this systemic racism?
I think Bank of America has a unique position in the world, and particularly in the United States. Almost half of the households in the country have some connection with us: a deposit account, a credit card, a car loan. So we touch a lot of people with our products and services. We also touch a lot of other companies, and so I think we have a fair amount of influence in setting the pace. But we also we know we can't do it alone. So many of the things we do are, one, to try to set an example, two, to try to improve ourselves. I think there's a real acknowledgement that we've done a lot. We've done a lot in the past. We've done a lot in reaction to since May, but we've got a lot to do. We've got a long way to go. And this is I'm using Brian's words, we call this a movement, not a moment. And there's a certain determination to not let this become a rearview mirror topic in 3 to 4 months, but to keep it on the forefront of what we do, how we live, how we operate the company. So we're global. We're 210,000 employees. We're multicultural. So I think we can bring a lot to the conversation. So not only in what we say, what we do, but how we talk to other clients and customers and communities.
Absolutely. And Daniel, when you look at it in terms of, I think it's true, and it's not just, obviously being a European, I see it from a slightly different perspective, look from the outside in, but, certainly we see that the same issues, exist. It's not just a US problem, it's a global problem, and it's one that needs to be addressed. But I think it's fair to say that if we're all waiting for governments to actually do something about this, I think, we'll be waiting. So how do you see that, your own organization and other institutions can really help to address this and take ownership of actually doing their part?
Yeah, I think that, as you think about what can organizations do, and if I may, even looking at my organization, we are uniquely positioned to, work with lots of clients across the country, right? So Fortune 500, some large clients, some smaller clients, but all those clients have a hiring strategy, right? And you think about the systemic racism as it relates to, people of color being, at the top of the leadership, the totem pole, if you will. And so, in the conversations that we can have in helping to build out that talent strategy, can help diversify and really bring onus to diversity, equity, and inclusion as relates to the hiring practices, right? So to ensure that at all levels of leadership, whether it be senior, mid-level, or executive, that there's fair representation across the board. I think that it's important that organizations reflect the communities that they serve, and I think that that's one small step to creating a better, more equitable society where people are focused more on how can we all get better than feeling oppressed.
Yeah, and it's interesting the point you make in terms of actually from an employment perspective. I mean, Daniel, from your perspective with the business that you've got, do you see that diversity is getting into the pipeline to be chosen? Because there clearly is, we've a long way to go before we've got, valid representation in organization. I think we'd all agree that. But is that diversity getting into the pipeline in order to be selected?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And the reason why I say that is because I think organizations holistically are getting more diverse, in terms of the staff and the folks that they bring in. But, the trend is that's happening at the lower level positions. And so, again, I think the ownership is on organizations to, create that talent pipeline. And part of that is, if you look at the access to mentorship and or upper level executives and organizations, polls suggest that, most minorities, African Americans, women, they feel like there's a glass ceiling there in terms of their access and being able to, fight for or vie for those positions of leadership, right? So I think that as organizations as a whole, I think they're getting more diverse, but I think that talent pipeline may be there, just not being cultivated enough with access to senior leaders who have been there, done that, and made it to the top to be able to kind of each one teach one type of scenario.
Okay. I think, Charles, if I come back to you just on this one, because one of the things that I get a sense of that when I talk to organizations is that organizations are very intentional about doing something proactively. I mean, as you mentioned in Bank of America that you're doing that. I suppose one of the questions I have is that, is there, if we can leverage each other, what each other organization is doing, then we kind of get, the output can be greater than the sum of the individual parts. Mm-hmm. How do you see organizations like yours really working with other businesses to kind of leverage that, but to also to serve as real bridge builders in the community?
Yeah, I'll give you two specific examples that are fairly concrete of what we're examples of what we're doing here. And this is just in Charlotte. And we'll probably replicate these kinds of things in our other markets across the country. But just recently, we have a program we call it Executive on Loan. So we take our executives, place them with organizations for a year or 2 years. We pay their salary, their bonus, we carry all the costs, but we put them on assignment with an organization. And a local community college here in Charlotte recently asked for some help in establishing its diversity programs. So we have loaned one of our top human resource executives to the school for at least a year to establish their diversity office. So she has become their chief diversity officer for the community college. And she'll set up a program, put some things in place, and she'll come back to the company in a year or so. Another example, just yesterday, I had a phone call from a business client who said, "Look, we're doing some self-inspection here in the wake of the George Floyd situation, and we're not as big as Bank of America, and we're not as far along, but we'd like some help. We'd like to talk to your teammates who've been down the road of organizing some of this, and putting it in place." And so we'll start that conversation just in terms of, I'll say, friendly advice, practice sharing, what we've done. I think we're pretty transparent about sharing with other entities what's worked, what hasn't worked, how we go about it. Again, because we're not the only ones, but I think we have, because we have a lot of resources, we can bring a lot to bear in terms of the conversation, and it's building it for the long term. And I think that is one of the critical differences here. And we've had experiences in our history in this country of racial strife and moments, and we think we've done a lot, and I think this may be a little more sophisticated. It may be deeper. It may last longer. And let's hope that it puts things in place for a more prosperous future.
Yeah, well, I think that, I mean, if you're putting, Bank of America people out into organizations, I mean, that's fantastic thing to do. It's giving real, practical, pragmatic support, and it's just not kind of empty words. It's real action and it's real cost. But there's also a massive benefit to the organizations that these people are going into, and I'm sure for the individuals from Bank of America, it's also very enlightening for them to be on that side of the counter to an extent.
I mean, we have another one that for the last 18 months has been with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, helping implement their HR system, their payroll system. They were upgrading to a more digital platform, and that's a fairly, for big companies, that's a fairly basic business process. But in enabling that, you have more satisfied clients internally. You have teachers.
Absolutely. And Daniel, how do you see from the organization, because you're kind of at that kind of talent identity and talent provision kind of part of how do you see how you can work with your clients or companies in the community to really improve the race relations?
Yeah, I think Charles had mentioned a few great things, things that I've had conversations around and/or feel strongly about in terms of the action that they are taking. So Charles, kudos to you and your team. I think the executive on loan program and some of the other stuff that you all are doing is fantastic. It's truly leading by example. John, I think that the first thing that we can do is, and that I've been doing, is acknowledging, right? Having conversations where we acknowledge, that there's been a historic and disproportionate effect to Black Americans, right? And to have honest dialogue about that. But to Charles' point, the dialogue can't just stop there, right? That would be futile. We have to put some actionable steps behind that. And again, to what Bank of America is doing, I think that's great. I think that the conversations that I'm having, back to the talent perspective, are about, company leadership. I know Charles had mentioned too about the boards and leadership teams, and do they reflect a diverse community, right? So the conversations I'm having is challenging some of the C-suite leaders I'm speaking to and/or senior leadership to look at their teams, look at their senior leadership teams, and where there's opportunities to diversify those teams, do so. And so certainly in a strategic manner and in course with business goals, but we certainly have to be very intentional about that. Last but not least, as we think about how we can really impact the community, a financial impact goes a long way, increasing sustainability in communities, increasing people's way of living and their means, if you will. If you think about, the spend, I know Charles said that they're looking at investing in small businesses. I think that's a fantastic approach. I've challenged every leader that I've spoke to take a strategic look at their spend and where they're spending their dollars for goods and services, and look to increase that to 15 or 20%, focused on minority-owned small businesses. And truly, that's really having an impact, a financial impact, and kind of putting those dollars behind, or that action behind the speech, and really, causing a really good effect in the community. If we think about the disparity of wealth, right? I think the Fed did a study a while ago, and it talked about the median wealth of a white family, and it's roughly about $150,000 median wealth. And you look at a median wealth of a Black family, it's an appalling $13,000, right? And that's not just on businesses to fix, but certainly businesses can be part of the solution.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like a terribly obvious question to ask, Daniel, in the circumstances, because, you know, as I said, you know, I kind of sit here as a white European, and I've never been on the receiving end of racism. It's never really something that's kind of hit my radar. But, you know, I just ask you, I mean, have you experienced racism firsthand? And if you have, how do you process it without becoming embittered and angry?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I've experienced it throughout my life, and it's unfortunate. You know, at times it's become commonplace in terms of the things that I've had to endure. You know, I'll speak quickly about a situation that occurred to me years ago, where there was a case of mistaken address, and a group of police officers showed up at my door and banged on my door at 2:00 in the morning. My eldest son at the time was about 6 months, and they're banging on my door. I throw on my robe real quick and fumble around and grab my glasses so I can see my way down the stairs. And I get to the door, and the officers are immediately screaming at me, about some type of domestic violence call. And so, well, we're asleep. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong address. And they were trying to then shove their way into my property, based on an assumption. And, again, I'm half asleep at the time. I started to, calmly speak to the officers to say, hey, we are perfectly fine. My wife is asleep. We have a baby. Please lower your voice. And then one of the officers just starts, shouting some racial slurs at me, calling me a black this, black that, no good for nothing. And again, these are people that we pay our tax dollars with to protect and serve, right? And that's just one type of incident that I can share with it. That incident has not led me to believe that all police officers are bad, right? I have plenty of friends who serve as police officers. I know folks in the FBI. I know folks in other leadership positions, and they're great people, right? For me and how I deal with that, I'm a faith-based person. And so for me, I'm not a person that takes things, super personally. Obviously, I take them with, the manner in which they were given. But for me, I let it process through my faith. And the way that happens is, I think about it, I pray about it, and then I just kind of give it to God.
I mean, I just find it extraordinary because, I mean, Charles, for, likes of you and I mean, that's just not something that is likely to happen, is it?
It's not as likely. The closest thing we probably experience is being excluded from things every now and then, which is a much, it's not necessarily because of our race. We may find ourselves in a place where we're just not part of the in group. And I've certainly been in situations like that. And if you magnify that about 1,000 times, it's probably a little bit more what Daniel's had to endure and experience. Yeah. But even on a small level, you can think about the hurt that you feel of that deliberate exclusion, where your ideas aren't as valued, or you're not as valued, frankly. So, and some of this conversation, I think, has ripped the cover off of that, so that we all have to do some self-respect.
And I think what you were saying earlier on, Charles, in terms of, when you're having, the conversation with, Black teenagers about how to be, it's actually then trying to have the conversation with them in a way which must be very, very challenging. I can only imagine that when things happen to them, that they don't become embittered, they don't become violent, because it's young heads on young shoulders, and that's challenging.
Yeah, well,
it is tough.
There is a part of all this that's there are actions that companies can take, and I think the DNA of companies is, you see a problem, you attack it, and you try to solve it. But there's also a language part of this, and I've said this in some of the conversations. We haven't developed the language to talk about this in the right ways yet, and what we're doing now, even though our predisposition is to move to action, and we always need to do that, we also need to figure out how to talk to each other, because in some of these conversations that I've had people go, I'm afraid to say anything. I might say the wrong thing. Yeah. And that's the wrong answer, because you got to engage. I mean, there are things that companies can do. So we talk about it's not just what we do externally with our communities and with our clients. It's also how we treat our employees. And are we paying our employees well enough to have a livable wage? And so again, because we could afford to do it, several years ago, we started moving our wage scale up so that if you work at Bank of America today, you make at least $20 an hour. We have to enable people, and the poverty that I think disproportionately affects the black population, we really got to address. We got to pay people. We got to figure out a way that we prosper in this together so that they can do the other things to enable themselves for that, higher level job and wherever they are, whatever company or organization that they live in. So part of this isn't just what you're doing on the outside. It's doing things on the inside, making sure you have diverse slates and promotions, making sure that you're looking at your hiring practices and movement of people all the way through the continuum of success in the company. Yeah. So I'll stop there.
But I mean, just when you're talking about the whole issue of diversity and inclusivity and how it's being rolled out, because I think in many organizations prior to the George Floyd, it was a little bit like, oh, that's HR and they're looking after it over there, and it kind of had nothing to do with the day to day, but it's become, kind of really center stage. So in the organization like Bank of America, Charles, how is D&I being led through your organization?
Well, we've had a diversity and inclusion officer for a long time, and we focused on everything from LGBTQ to women. I've been in the company over 20 years, and I think women have been very, very successful, or the company's been successful in the promotion of women. That wasn't always the case, 2 or 3 decades ago. I think now a lot of the focus is on the Black and Hispanic population. So we hold ourselves accountable. We hold our managers accountable. They're constantly doing sort of, I call it the accountability. I won't call it, it's an audit or inspection or review that we do that with year end when it comes to compensation. But beyond that, those are things you can sort of count and measure. You can put it on a spreadsheet. But I think beyond that, I give you another example where we started Hispanic business councils in various markets because we realized that was an underserved population, and it's largely, it has a business intent. It's trying to get our Hispanic population to help nurture relationships in the community so that we hope that we'll attract more clients and customers. And today there's a lot of focus, obviously, on the killings after George Floyd and everything from policing, skills development, job creation. But there's a formal side to this, which is institutionalized in the way the company runs itself. And I think there's also a personal side where I would say we're becoming a little more human.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's true. And Daniel, from your perspective, how is D&I being led through your own organization?
Yeah, for us at Genius Talent, it's really about staying true to our core from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, and might I add equity as well. We operate off of meritocracy, right? So we want folks to be moved ahead based off their deeds, based off of what they do and what they produce at work, right? And so to that end, we want to hire people who are culturally aligned to that vision, and that they understand that, just because you might look like me, just because we might go golfing together, or just because you might play tennis together, or grab a beer every weekend, after work or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be moved ahead, right? It's about your production and how you show up at work and bringing the best version of yourself. And that's really the focus for us as it relates to D&I. And really expanding upon that as we, again, work with our clients and partner with them to ensure that they have some type of strategy around that as well. That, their D&I strategy is not just, to Charles's point, simple check in the box or, looking at numbers on a spreadsheet, that it's really more about the holistic human feel of the organization.
Absolutely. Final question to both of you. I mean, the whole George Floyd, everything that's happened on recent events have kind of put this right, smack bang on our dashboards, on our desks, on our news media. But of course, other stories will come along. I mean, you've got a presidential election coming up in the US, but other events will come along, and it's likely not to have the same high profile on the front page. Do you think that the drive for change that we're talking about here, do you think will it stick? Or in 12 or 18 months, we were saying, we did a lot in 2020 about D&I, but you know what? Other things have kind of jumped on the priority list. Charles, maybe I could ask you first.
I'd like to think that this is different. I'd like to think that it's sustainable. 18 months is a long time. I do think there's a little more intensity this time. There's a little more energy behind this, and I'll just use Bank of America as an example because that's what I know. That the leadership team committed $1 billion to be spent over 4 years, beginning in 2021, around issues of racial equity, and it will focus on things like housing, skills and job creation, investment in small business, access to health care that are determinants, and particularly those who are adversely affected by the pandemic situation. So that'll be $1 billion that will be spread around to our markets, and some things done on a national level. And that's a 4-year effort and 4-year commitment. So I'm pretty sure that for Bank of America, it's going to last for more than 18 months. But I think we really have to keep this in the forefront and just keep pounding away at the topic and the issue, and not let anybody off the hook, not let ourselves off the hook. And I grew up in the South. I was born in North Carolina. I've never had an address outside of the state of North Carolina. And I grew up with certain presumptions and culture and knowledge of history. And a lot of that needs to be reinspected. It needs to be modernized and looked at through a different lens. And so I probably read more books and had more conversations in the last 4 or 5 months than I have in the last 10 years. And I think that will, it's got to be hearts and minds. And this time, I think it's a journey, though. This will not solve itself in 12, 18 months. It won't be like a turnkey solution. But I think we're on a path that has more hopefulness than I've seen before.
And Daniel, do you share that optimism?
I'm cautiously optimistic, right? I think that we're at a good spot. To Charles's point, I think there's certainly more vigor towards the conversation today, and certainly there are a lot of folks individually and organizations that are stepping up and taking real action towards a change, and that's a great start. And I'll quote the movie Remember the Titans, right? Attitude reflects leadership, right? And so I think the attitude around will this stick or not will be largely in part to the leadership that the folks on this call and other leaders across the nation, what they continue to say and what they continue to do. One of the core values here, or at our organization, or guiding principles, if you will, is that your say and do must match, right? So your say and what you do, they've got to be equivalent. So I think that as long as those things happen, I think that would help with the making this stick in society. I think that this is a defining moment for us. I think in life and as a community, as a nation, this is really a defining moment. And again, I think it's incumbent upon the leadership throughout the nation to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, having those tough conversations. And I know Charles had mentioned before, sometimes in those conversations, you might tiptoe because you're scared to say the wrong thing. I think that's where we need to rip the Band-Aid off and get in a small group circles around the nation to start having some of this dialogue in a safe, structured environment where we can have those conversations. Again, I think those things will help us help this stick. And really the last thing that I'll say about that is, part of that is examining our inner circles, right? And as leaders, and looking at the 5 to 7 couples or people that you spend the most time with, if your inner circle isn't diverse and isn't inclusive, then it'll be a real challenge for anyone to make that full-scale change in the community or impact that we should see. Now, I know that doesn't change overnight at all, but that's a challenge that I throw out there. For me in particularly, I try to keep my circle as diverse as possible, right? I know I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I want diverse people in there with other experiences, other backgrounds, and that can bring other things to the table, right? And I think, again, collectively, if we keep our focus on all that, keep taking those actionable steps, like the commitment Bank of America made, $1 billion, that's immense. Over the course of 4 years, that's immense, and that's real action. I think the more of those things that happen, and the more that we continue to have these dialogues in closed sessions and open, I think that it can stick.
Yeah, well, I think your personal challenge, Daniel, is a great personal challenge. I think it's a great one to make. Charles, you were just going to come in there.
Yeah, John, I'm going to play off something that Daniel said earlier. That another reason for, I guess, my hopefulness, I hope it's not naivete, is that the trend I'm seeing, more and more companies are really establishing themselves with a sense of core values. Daniel has it for his company. We've had it for our company, and since it's changed, the words change sometimes. It used to be called inclusive meritocracy. Now it's called trust the team, acknowledge the power of the team, acknowledge the power of your people. But what I'm seeing more, particularly with younger people who are starting companies, or when I say younger people in their 40s who are entrepreneurial, and last year I met with a company that group of guys got together, they liked working with each other. They had different skill sets, and they said, okay, let's start an enterprise. And I said, well, how'd you pick your product? And they said, we need to pick a product. We picked a set of core values.
That's great.
We sat down.
Wow.
And we said, what do we stand for? What do we want to stand for? Let's design our system of values. That's what they did. And then they went out and decided, this is the service we're going to provide.
Wow,
and now
that's phenomenal.
When I met with them, they were wringing their hands over. They'd grown to about 80 or 100 people, and they knew they needed to take that next leap for growth, but it was risky because they were going to have to take on debt and responsibility, and they were really grappling with what they should do, and that's really where we got into the conversation. But I was inspired by those guys. It's really interesting, and to me, and that had nothing to do with the racial inequality that we're talking about here, but it tells me that the up-and-comers care as much about social impact as they care about profitability. We've got to, you got to turn a profit. That's the one thing about businesses, but you got to turn a profit, and you have to serve the communities that you're in. You got to do it. It's what Jim Collins say, the power of the and we've got to do that. And that's one of the reasons I think the trends are in favor. I want to be, again, I don't want to be naive, because there are things that happen in, you're asking about observing racism, and, when I was a teenager coming out of high school and members of a football team decided to go to the beach after graduation, and we took one of our black teammates with us, and I'm like, well, hell, let's go get a hotel down at the coast. And we went from hotel to hotel, and they'd look at us, we were white, they'd look at him, he was black, and they would refuse us a room.
Wow.
And, you go, really? I mean, but of course that's 1974. And I thought we'd come a lot further than we have, but we still have a long way to go. But I use that as an example. We've got to make progress. We got to make progress every year, every decade, grind away at this until it's not something that we have to talk about anymore.
Absolutely.
It just happens because we're people.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
and I think that it's a great story, but I also love the story about the company that starts with their values and then determines what they're going to do afterwards. I think that's a brilliant story. And I think that's just, it's a great sign of kind of where they're coming from and how they want to make a contribution. So I think that is fantastic. But I do think that the subject, as we say, it's a journey. It's going to be, a long time in resolving, but I do think if looking at the organizations like, Bank of America and also the Genius Talent Group, I think, with executives like you guys and in organizations that are really committed the way your two organizations are. I think it's a great example to others. So to Charles and to Daniel, thank you so much indeed for joining us on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure. It's been fascinating, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you for having us.
Right.